Did you know there is one line you can say to a true narcissist that can make them fear you, not just walk away, but actually fear you forever? I'm talking about a genuine, deep down fear that shakes them to their core. Now, I know that sounds dramatic, but stick with me here because what I'm about to share with you will change everything about how you deal with these manipulative people in your life. You see, narcissists are master game players. They thrive on chaos, they feed off your emotional reactions, and they absolutely live for that applause. Whether it's positive attention or negative drama, they don't care. They just want to be the center of your universe, pulling all the strings while you dance to their tune. But here's what they don't expect. There's a way to flip that script completely. There's a way to leave them exposed, powerless, and scrambling for control they'll never get back. Before I reveal this sentence that can stop them cold, I want you to do something for me. Tell me in the comments what is the worst thing a narcissist has ever tried to pull on you. I'm talking about the most outrageous manipulation, the cruelest mind game, the most destructive lie they've spread about you. Let's see just how far these folks can go, because I guarantee you someone listening right now has a story that will make your jaw drop. Let me tell you about Sarah. And yes, I'm changing her name to protect her privacy. Sarah came to me absolutely devastated. She'd been married to what she thought was the perfect man for 8 years. Charming, successful, always the life of the party. But behind closed doors, he was systematically destroying her sense of reality. He'd tell her she was crazy for questioning his late nights, call her paranoid when she found suspicious messages. And then, here's the kicker. He started a full-blown smear campaign against her with their mutual friends. This man told everyone who would listen that Sarah was mentally unstable, that she was making things up, that she was the one being abusive. He painted himself as the long-suffering husband trying to help his troubled wife. Sarah lost friends, she questioned her own sanity, and she was on the verge of a complete breakdown. She felt trapped, helpless, like she was fighting a ghost because every time she tried to defend herself, it just made her look more crazy to everyone around her. But then Sarah learned about this one sentence, just one simple sentence that she delivered with calm, unshakable confidence the next time her husband tried to gaslight her. You know what happened? He went white as a sheet. He stuttered. He actually backed away from her. For the first time in their relationship, he was the one who looked rattled, confused, and completely off balance. That sentence didn't just change that one conversation. It changed the entire dynamic of their relationship. Suddenly, he couldn't manipulate her anymore. His tactics stopped working. And when a narcissist can't control you, when they can't get that emotional reaction they're desperately seeking, they start to panic. They start to fear you because you represent something they can't handle, someone who sees through their game and refuses to play. Now, you might be thinking, come on, Dr. Phil, one sentence can't possibly have that much power. But here's what you need to understand. Narcissists are incredibly fragile people hiding behind a mask of superiority. Their entire sense of self depends on maintaining control over other people's emotions and perceptions. When you take that away from them with just a few carefully chosen words, it's like pulling the curtain back on the Wizard of Oz. They're exposed, vulnerable, and terrified. This isn't about being cruel or getting revenge. This is about protection. This is about reclaiming your power and your sanity. This is about finally having a tool that works when nothing else has. Because let's be honest, you've probably tried everything else, haven't you? You've tried reasoning with them, pleading with them, calling them out on their behavior. You've tried being the bigger person, taking the high road, killing them with kindness. And none of it worked, did it? In fact, it probably made things worse. Here's what we're going to cover today. I'm going to break down exactly how this sentence works and why it strikes fear into the heart of every narcissist. We're going to dive deep into the psychology behind why this particular combination of words is their kryptonite. But more importantly, I'm going to teach you the right way to use it, because if you fumble the delivery, if you say it wrong or at the wrong time, it can blow up in your face. We're also going to talk about what happens after you drop this verbal bomb, how they might react, how to protect yourself, and how to maintain the upper hand you've just gained. Because make no mistake, once you use this sentence, there's no going back. You're stepping into a new level of personal power, and that comes with both incredible freedom and serious responsibility. If you haven't subscribed to this podcast yet, do it right now. We're exposing these power games and manipulation tactics every single week, and I'm giving you the tools you need to protect yourself and the people you love, because nobody, and I mean nobody, deserves to live under the thumb of a narcissist's control. Now, if we're going to understand why that one sentence has such devastating power over a narcissist, we need to crawl inside their heads for a minute. And I'm warning you, it's not a pretty place to be. But understanding how they think is absolutely critical if you want to protect yourself and stop falling for their games. Here's the thing about narcissists. Everything they do, every single move they make, is driven by two core needs that consume their entire existence. First, they have an insatiable hunger for control. They need to control your emotions, your reactions, your perceptions, and ultimately, your reality. Second, they have this desperate, almost pathological need for admiration and validation. They don't just want to be liked. They need to be worshipped, feared, or at minimum, constantly thought about. Think about it like this. Imagine you're so emotionally starved, so empty inside, that you need other people's attention just to feel like you exist. That's the narcissist's reality. They're like emotional vampires, feeding off your reactions, your drama, your pain, and yes, even your love. Without that constant supply of attention, they start to collapse from the inside out. But here's where it gets really twisted. Because they're so desperate for this validation, they've constructed what psychologists call a false self. Essentially a mask that they wear to hide their true, broken interior. This mask has to be perfect. It has to be impressive, charming, successful, or at least memorable in some way. They spend enormous amounts of energy maintaining this facade because their survival depends on it. The mask is everything to them. It's their identity, their worth, their entire reason for existing. And they will do absolutely anything, lie, cheat, manipulate, destroy relationships, ruin reputations to keep that mask in place. Because underneath it, there's a terrified, shame-filled person who believes they're fundamentally worthless. Now, here's what makes them so dangerous. They know that their false self isn't real, which means they live in constant fear that someone will see through it. So they become masters of projection and deflection. Instead of dealing with their own shame and inadequacy, they make it your problem. They'll convince you that you're the crazy one, you're the problem, you're the one who's unreasonable or unstable. Let me tell you about Marcus, a client of mine who worked for a narcissistic boss for 3 years. This boss would take credit for Marcus's work, humiliate him in meetings, and then turn around and act like they were best friends. But the really insidious part was how this boss would gaslight Marcus constantly. If Marcus questioned a decision, the boss would say, "You're being too sensitive." If Marcus stood up for himself, suddenly he was difficult to work with. If Marcus achieved something great, the boss would find some tiny flaw to focus on, making Marcus question whether his success was even real. Marcus started documenting everything because he thought he was losing his mind. He'd go home every night wondering if maybe he really was too sensitive, maybe he really was imagining things. That's the power of narcissistic manipulation. They make you doubt your own reality so completely that you become dependent on them to tell you what's true. But here's the key insight when narcissists attack your character, when they gaslight you, when they try to make you question yourself. They're not just being mean, they're fighting for their psychological survival. Because if you start to see through their game, if you stop reacting the way they want you to, their entire system falls apart. They explode when you don't play along because you're threatening their very existence. Think about it. If their whole identity is built on controlling others and getting admiration, what happens when someone refuses to be controlled? What happens when someone sees through the mask and isn't impressed? They panic, they rage, They do whatever it takes to regain control. This is why they're so good at finding your weak spots and pushing your buttons. They study you like a science project, figuring out exactly what will get you emotional, what will make you defend yourself, what will keep you engaged in their drama. They'll use your insecurities against you, bring up your past mistakes, and twist your words until you don't know which way is up. I had another client, Jennifer, whose narcissistic mother was a master at this. Every family gathering, this woman would make some passive-aggressive comment about Jennifer's weight, her career choices, or her parenting. When Jennifer would get upset, the mother would immediately play the victim. "I was just trying to help. Why are you so mean to me? I guess I can't say anything right." And suddenly, Jennifer would find herself apologizing to the person who had just insulted her. That's the social chess game they play. They bait you into a reaction, then use your reaction as evidence that you're the problem. They test your boundaries constantly, pushing a little further each time to see what they can get away with. And when you finally blow up or break down, they act shocked and hurt as if they had nothing to do with pushing you to that breaking point. The blame shifting is relentless. Nothing is ever their fault. If they cheat, it's because you weren't paying enough attention to them. If they lie, it's because you can't handle the truth. If they rage, it's because you made them angry. They live in a world where they are always the victim and everyone else is always the perpetrator. If you've ever wondered why no argument works, why no amount of logic or evidence can get through to them, why nothing you say or do seems to matter, this is what you're really up against. You're not dealing with someone who's interested in truth, fairness, or healthy relationships. You're dealing with someone whose entire psychological structure depends on maintaining an illusion of superiority while making everyone else responsible for their emotional needs. Understanding this changes everything about how you approach them, and it's exactly why that one sentence I'm going to teach you is so powerful. Now that you understand how desperately narcissists need your emotional reactions to survive, let's talk about what truly rattles them to their core. And I'm telling you, once you understand this, you'll never look at these interactions the same way again. The three things that absolutely terrify a narcissist are indifference, boundaries, and self-possession. Notice I didn't say anger, confrontation, or even cutting them out of your life completely. Those things can actually feed them because they still represent emotional engagement. No, what scares them is when you become completely unmoved by their antics, when you refuse to let them dictate your emotional state, and when you demonstrate that your sense of self doesn't depend on their opinion of you. Think about it this way: a narcissist is like someone who's drowning, and your emotions are their life raft. When you get angry, upset, defensive, or even when you try to please them, you're throwing them that life raft. You're giving them exactly what they need to stay afloat. But indifference, that's like watching them flail around in the water and calmly saying, "I see you're struggling, but that's not my problem to solve." This is why one short, boundary-setting sentence can unsettle them more than any screaming match, any detailed confrontation, or any attempt to expose their behavior to others. Because that sentence communicates something that strikes at the very heart of their worst fear: that they don't matter, that they can't control you, and that their opinion of you carries absolutely no weight in your world. Let me break down why most of the approaches people try with narcissists not only fail, but actually make things worse. Confrontation seems like it should work, right? You call them out on their lies, their manipulation, their cruel behavior. You present evidence. You demand accountability. But what you're actually doing is giving them a stage for their drama. You're engaging with their version of reality, which means you're still playing their game by their rules. I can't tell you how many people have come to me saying, "Dr. Phil, I told them exactly what they were doing wrong. I laid out all the ways they've hurt me. I gave them examples, dates, witnesses." And you know what they did? They turned it around and made me the villain. How is that possible? It's possible because confrontation requires two people who are interested in truth and resolution. Narcissists aren't interested in either of those things. They're interested in drama and control. Pleading is even worse. When you beg them to see your point of view, to care about your feelings, to treat you with basic respect, you're essentially saying, your approval is so important to me that I'm willing to humiliate myself to get it. You might as well hand them a loaded weapon and ask them to please not shoot you with it. And pointing out their abuse, that's like giving them a playbook of what's working. Oh, you didn't like it when I did that? Let me file that away for future reference. They don't feel shame about hurting you. They feel pleased that they found an effective button to push. Ever tried to call out a narcissist and it totally backfired? Comment with your story below, because I guarantee you're not alone, and understanding why it backfired is crucial to never making that mistake again. All of these approaches fail for the same reason. They give the narcissist exactly what they're looking for: your emotional investment in their opinion of you. They feed their drama. They confirm their power over your emotional state, and they keep you trapped in a dynamic where you're constantly trying to prove your worth to someone who has no intention of ever acknowledging it. But what happens when you refuse to engage with their version of reality? What happens when you don't defend yourself, don't explain yourself, don't try to convince them of anything? What happens when you simply state your boundary and walk away? They panic. Because suddenly, they're not getting the emotional fuel they need to function. This is where the power of the right words comes in. The sentence I'm going to teach you isn't designed to hurt them, convince them, or change them. It's designed to protect you by cutting off their supply of emotional drama from you. It's like putting up an invisible force field that their manipulation tactics simply can't penetrate. The genius of this approach is that it doesn't require them to change, acknowledge their behavior, or suddenly develop empathy they don't possess. It only requires you to change your response. And when you change your response from emotional reactivity to calm self-possession, everything shifts. I worked with a woman named Lisa whose ex-husband was making her life hell during their divorce proceedings. He would send her long, accusatory emails designed to upset her. He would make unreasonable demands about their children's schedules. He would spread lies about her to their mutual friends. Lisa spent months trying to defend herself, correct the record, and prove she wasn't the terrible person he was painting her to be. But then Lisa learned to respond differently. Instead of long emails defending herself, she would send short, factual responses that didn't engage with his emotional manipulations. Instead of trying to convince their friends of the truth, she simply lived her truth and let her actions speak for themselves. And instead of getting drawn into arguments about his latest accusation, she would simply state her boundary and disengage. You know what happened? He escalated for a while, trying harder and harder to get an emotional reaction from her. But when that didn't work, when he couldn't get her to dance to his tune anymore, he eventually moved on to easier targets. The constant drama stopped because Lisa stopped feeding it. That's the power of refusing to play their game. That's why the right sentence, delivered with the right energy, can stop them cold. It's not about being mean or cruel. It's about being unmovable in your own reality. Let's get specific about what you actually say and why it works so well that it can make even the most hardened manipulator back down and look for easier prey elsewhere. All right, here we are. The moment you've been waiting for. The sentence that can stop a narcissist cold, make them fear you, and change the entire dynamic of your relationship forever. Are you ready? Here it is. Your opinion of me is not my reality. That's it. 7 simple words that pack more power than a 1,000-word argument, more strength than any confrontation, and more protection than any defense you could possibly mount. Now, before you think, that's it. That's the big secret. Let me explain to you exactly why this sentence is psychological dynamite. When you say, your opinion of me is not my reality, you're doing something that no narcissist expects, and very few people have the courage to do. You're completely disconnecting from their assessment of you. You're saying, in essence, I don't need your validation, I don't fear your criticism, and I'm not going to let you define who I am. But there are variations you can use depending on the situation. You might say, "That's your perspective, not mine." Or, "I see things differently." Or even, "I don't accept that version of events." The key is that whatever words you choose, they must be firm, they must be neutral, and they must not be up for debate. You're not asking for their permission. You're not seeking their understanding. You're simply stating a fact about your own autonomy. Now, let me tell you why this terrifies them to their core. First, it signals that you're onto their tactics. Remember, narcissists rely on you believing that their perception of reality is the only one that matters. When you calmly state that their opinion doesn't define your reality, you're essentially saying, "I see what you're doing, and it's not going to work on me anymore." That's terrifying to someone whose entire strategy depends on you not recognizing the game they're playing. Second, it completely deprives them of emotional control over you. Think about every other response they're used to getting: anger, or hurt, defensiveness, pleading explanation, justification. All of these responses hand them the keys to your emotional state. But "your opinion of me is not my reality" gives them nothing to work with. It's like trying to start a fire with wet matches. There's no emotional fuel for them to feed on. Third, and this is the big one, it signals that you have boundaries and that you're not looking for their approval. This is a narcissist's worst nightmare because their entire power structure is built on being the ultimate authority on who you are and what you're worth. When you remove that authority from them, when you essentially fire them from the job of being your judge and jury, they lose all their leverage over you. Let me break down the word choice here because this is crucial. Notice that the sentence is completely neutral. There's no sarcasm, no emotion, no accusation. You're not calling them names, you're not attacking their character, you're not even acknowledging that they're trying to manipulate you. You're simply stating a boundary about your own reality. This neutrality is what makes it so powerful and so hard for them to counter. If you said it was sarcasm, "Oh, your opinion of me is not my reality," you'd be giving them ammunition. They could focus on your tone, call you disrespectful, play the victim about how cruelly you're treating them. If you said it with emotion, anger, hurt, frustration, you'd be proving that they still have the power to affect you. But when you say it with calm, matter-of-fact neutrality, there's nothing for them to grab onto. Let me give you some real-life examples of how this sentence has instantly shifted dynamics. I worked with a client named David whose mother was constantly criticizing his life choices. Every phone call became a litany of everything he was doing wrong: his career, his girlfriend, his apartment, his spending habits. David would spend hours on these calls defending himself, explaining his decisions, trying to get her approval. But after learning this technique, the next time she started in on him, he simply said, "Mom, your opinion of my life is not my reality." She was stunned into silence. For the first time in their relationship, she didn't have a comeback. And when she tried to escalate, "How dare you talk to your mother that way?" David simply repeated, "That's your perspective. I see things differently." The call ended quickly, and future calls became much shorter and less intrusive because she learned that her manipulation tactics were no longer effective. Or take Rebecca, who had a narcissistic boss who loved to undermine her in meetings. He would dismiss her ideas, question her competence, and make snide comments about her performance. Rebecca used to go home every night feeling defeated and questioning her own abilities. But after learning this approach, the next time he tried to humiliate her in front of the team, she looked him in the eye and said, "Your assessment of my work is not my reality." The room went quiet. He stumbled over his words and moved on to someone else. And from that day forward, he rarely targeted her because she'd proven she wasn't going to provide the emotional reaction he was looking for. Here's another variation that works beautifully. "I don't accept that characterization of myself." Simple, direct, and completely removes you from their narrative about who you are. The beauty of this sentence is that it works in any relationship dynamic. With a spouse who's constantly putting you down, with a parent who never stops criticizing, with a coworker who loves to undermine you, with a friend who always makes everything about themselves. The specific relationship doesn't matter because the psychology behind it is always the same, but you got to deploy this right, and there are some serious pitfalls if you fumble the delivery. The wrong tone, the wrong timing, or the wrong follow-up can not only neutralize the power of this sentence, but actually make your situation worse. Now listen carefully, because this is where people mess up. You cannot, and I repeat, cannot say this sentence in a moment of rage. You cannot use it as a weapon when you're fed up and ready to explode. You cannot deliver it with venom in your voice or fire in your eyes. If you do, you've just turned a powerful boundary-setting tool into an inflammatory challenge, and that's going to blow up in your face. The power of your opinion of me is not my reality comes from its calm, unshakable delivery. You say it the same way you'd say it's raining outside or the store closes at 9, matter-of-fact, neutral, final. The moment you add emotion to it, you're telling the narcissist that they've succeeded in getting under your skin, and they'll see that as a victory worth pursuing. Never use this sentence to bait them. Never throw it out there as a challenge to see how they'll react. And never, ever use it as a threat, like keep pushing me and I'll tell you that your opinion doesn't matter. That completely destroys the effectiveness because you're making it about them instead of about protecting your own reality. So how might they react when you drop this boundary bomb? Buckle up, because it's not going to be pretty at first. They might explode in rage because you've just taken away their favorite toy, your emotional reactivity. They might start screaming about how disrespectful you are, how cruel you're being, how you've changed and become impossible to deal with. Don't take the bait. Their rage is actually proof that you've hit the target. They might go into complete denial mode. That's ridiculous! Of course my opinion matters! I know you better than anyone! Again, don't engage. Don't explain why their opinion doesn't define you. Don't justify your boundary. Just let their words hang in the air while you remain unmoved. Here's a manipulation tactic that catches a lot of people off guard. They might start crying. Suddenly, this person who was just attacking your character is sobbing about how much you've hurt them, how you're being so mean, how they were just trying to help. These aren't real tears. They're tactical tears designed to make you feel guilty and back down from your boundary. Or they'll play the victim. I can't believe you're treating me this way after everything I've done for you. This is how you repay me. By telling me my opinion doesn't matter, they're trying to flip the script and make you the aggressor. Stand your ground. Your boundary is not an attack on them. It's protection for you. And here's the one that really gets people. They might start a smear campaign. They'll run to mutual friends, family members, co-workers, anyone who will listen and paint you as the unreasonable one. Can you believe what they said to me? They told me my opinion doesn't matter! I was just trying to help, and they completely disrespected me. Let them. People who truly know you will see through it, and people who believe their version without getting your side probably weren't really in your corner anyway. Now, let's talk about safety because this is crucial. If you're dealing with someone who has a history of physical violence or threats, you need to be extremely careful about when and how you use this sentence. If you're in an abusive relationship, your safety comes first always. Consider using this technique in text or email first, or better yet, work with a professional to develop a safety plan before you start setting these kinds of boundaries. For most situations, though, face-to-face delivery is more powerful because they can see your calm demeanor and body language. But if you're not confident in your ability to stay neutral in person, text or email can work. Just remember, no matter how they respond to your text, don't get drawn into a back and forth argument. Send your boundary statement and then disengage. Sometimes the best move is to simply walk away after delivering the sentence. You don't owe them a conversation. You don't owe them an explanation. You've stated your boundary, and now you remove yourself from their presence. This is especially powerful because it shows that you're not interested in debating your right to have your own reality. Let me give you some practical scripts you can add to your toolkit. If they keep pushing after you've set the boundary, you can say, I see what you're doing, but I'm not engaging. Simple, direct, and it lets them know that you recognize their manipulation without getting drawn into it. If they try to argue with your boundary, that's your perspective, not my reality. You're not debating the merits of their opinion. You're simply restating that you don't accept it as the final word on who you are. If they escalate to personal attacks, I'm not going to participate in this conversation. Then physically remove yourself if possible. Don't explain why you're leaving. Don't threaten to leave. Just go. Let's role play some scenarios. Say you're dealing with a narcissistic coworker who loves to undermine you in meetings. They make a snide comment about your presentation skills in front of the team. Instead of defending your abilities or getting flustered, you look directly at them and say, your assessment of my presentation is not my reality. Then you turn back to the group and continue with your agenda. You don't acknowledge their sputtering response. You don't give them the floor to elaborate on their criticism. You've stated your boundary and moved on. Or maybe you're dealing with an ex who constantly criticizes your parenting during custody exchanges. They start in on how you're not disciplining the kids properly, how you're too lenient, how the children are going to be ruined because of your approach. Instead of defending your parenting choices or getting into an argument in front of your children, you simply say, your opinion of my parenting is not my reality. Then you focus on your children. Come on, kids. Let's go. Here's one for dealing with a narcissistic family member. Maybe it's a parent who never misses an opportunity to criticize your life choices. They start in on your career, your relationship, your living situation. Instead of the usual defensive explanations, you calmly say, your opinion of my life choices is not my reality. If they escalate, you add, I can see you're upset, but I'm not going to debate this with you. If they continue, you leave. The key in every scenario is the same: deliver the boundary with calm authority. Don't engage with their attempts to draw you back into argument, and be prepared to physically remove yourself from the situation if necessary. That sentence is your shield, but here's the truth. Your mindset is the armor that makes it truly effective. Your mindset is everything. That sentence I taught you, your opinion of me is not my reality, it's not magic words. It's not going to work if you don't truly believe it in your bones. Because here's what I've learned after decades of helping people deal with toxic relationships. The narcissist can smell your doubt from a mile away. If you say those words, but you're still secretly hoping for their approval, still worried about what they think, still afraid of their reaction, they'll know. And they'll keep pushing because they can sense that your boundary isn't solid yet. So how do you reinforce this new dynamic? First, you repeat as needed. You don't say it once and expect them to never test you again. They will test you over and over. It's like training a dog. You have to be consistent every single time, or they'll think the rule doesn't really apply. When they come back with another attack on your character, another attempt to define your reality, you calmly repeat, your opinion of me is not my reality. No elaboration, no explanation, no justification. And here's what you absolutely cannot do. You cannot start explaining why their opinion doesn't matter. The moment you start justifying your boundary, you've undermined it. You're essentially saying, let me convince you that I have the right to my own reality, which puts them back in the position of being the judge of whether your boundary is valid. Don't argue. I know this is hard because every fiber of your being wants to defend yourself when they're attacking your character. But arguing keeps you trapped in their game. When you argue, you're accepting the premise that their opinion of you is worth debating. You're giving their assessment of you enough weight to fight against it. Instead, you simply state your boundary and then remove yourself from the conversation. This is where mastering what we call the gray rock approach becomes crucial. You become bland, non-reactive, and succinct in all your interactions with them. Think of yourself as the most boring rock in the garden. Nothing interesting to see here, nothing dramatic to feed on. When they try to provoke you, you respond with the emotional energy of someone reading the phone book. They ask you a loaded question designed to start an argument. I see it differently. They make a snide comment about your appearance, your choices, your relationships. That's your perspective. They try to drag you into analyzing their behavior or defending your decisions. I'm not going to discuss that. The key is staying focused on your reality, not their projection. They're going to keep trying to pull you into their version of events, their interpretation of what happened, their assessment of who's right and who's wrong. Don't go there. Your reality is your reality. You know what you experienced. You know what you saw. You know what you felt. You don't need their agreement or validation to trust your own perceptions. I worked with a client named Patricia whose sister was a master manipulator. This sister would constantly rewrite history, claiming conversations never happened, denying promises she'd made, and insisting that Patricia was too sensitive or remembering things wrong. Patricia spent years doubting her own memory, apologizing for being difficult, and accepting her sister's version of reality to keep the peace. But once Patricia learned to trust her own perceptions and stop seeking her sister's validation, everything changed. When her sister would say, "That conversation never happened," Patricia would simply respond, "I remember it differently." When her sister would claim Patricia was being too sensitive, Patricia would say, "That's your opinion, not my reality." Patricia stopped trying to convince her sister of the truth and started living her own truth instead. Now here's where they're really going to test you. They're going to try the guilt trip. They'll call you cold, selfish, cruel, heartless. They'll say you've changed, that you're not the person they used to know, that you're being impossible to deal with. This is actually a good sign because it means your boundary is working. But you have to stand your ground. When they call you cold, you don't defend your warmth. When they call you selfish, you don't list all the things you've done for them. When they say you've changed, you might even agree. You're right, I have changed. I've learned to value my own perspective. That usually stops them cold because they're expecting you to defend yourself, not own your growth. Let me tell you about Michael, a client whose father was constantly criticizing his parenting. Every visit became a lecture about how Michael was too soft on his kids, how he was raising them wrong, how they were going to turn out badly because of his approach. Michael used to spend hours defending his parenting philosophy, showing his father articles about child development, trying to prove that his methods were valid. But after learning these techniques, Michael's approach completely changed. When his father started in on the usual criticism, Michael simply said, "Your opinion of my parenting is not my reality." His father escalated, calling Michael stubborn and saying he was ruining his grandchildren. Michael stayed calm. "I can see you feel strongly about this, but I'm comfortable with my approach." When his father wouldn't let it go, Michael gathered his children and left early. "We're going to head home now. Thanks for having us." The beautiful thing was that Michael's children witnessed their father standing up for himself and for them without getting drawn into drama. They saw what healthy boundaries look like in action. And you know what happened? His father's criticism became much less frequent because he learned that it didn't get the emotional reaction he was looking for. Here's another success story that really drives the point home. Angela had a narcissistic boss who loved to micromanage and second-guess every decision she made. This boss would publicly question Angela's judgment, make her redo perfectly good work, and constantly imply that she wasn't competent enough for her position. Angela used to work overtime trying to prove herself, documentation every decision, and bending over backward to avoid criticism. But once Angela started using these boundary-setting techniques, she stopped over explaining her decisions and stopped seeking her boss's approval for work that was clearly within her job description. When her boss would make disparaging comments about her work, Angela would simply say, "Oh, I'm confident in my approach." When her boss would try to make her redo work that met all the requirements, Angela would respond, "I believe this meets the project specifications." She became unmovable in her professional confidence. Her boss tried to escalate for a while, but eventually backed off because Angela was no longer providing the emotional drama that fed her need for control. Angela's work performance actually improved because she was spending her energy on doing her job instead of managing her boss's emotions. Next time someone attacks your character, promise me you'll try this approach and report back in the comments. I want to hear about your victories, your challenges, and how it feels to finally stop dancing to someone else's tune. Because here's what happens long term when you consistently refuse to play their game. Everything changes, not just for them, but for you too. When you consistently assert this boundary, when you truly embody the truth that their opinion of you is not your reality, something profound happens. The narcissist in your life begins to experience something they've probably never felt before, the fear of losing their emotional supply. And that fear changes everything about how they interact with you. See, up until now, you've been a reliable source of the drama, attention, and emotional reactions they need to feel powerful and important. But when you stop providing that supply, when you become emotionally unavailable for their games, they start to panic. It's like their favorite restaurant suddenly closed down. They're hungry, but their usual source of nourishment is no longer available. Now, I want to prepare you for what might happen initially, because some narcissists will escalate before they back down. It's like the extinction burst that happens when you're trying to break a bad habit. The behavior gets worse before it gets better. They might increase their attacks, spread more lies about you, or try more desperate tactics to get you back under their control. This escalation is actually a good sign because it means your boundary is working, but it can be scary if you're not expecting it. But here's the beautiful truth. Most narcissists, when they realize they can't get their emotional fix from you anymore, will eventually move on to easier targets. They're not going to waste time and energy on someone who won't give them what they need. It's nothing personal. You've just become useless to them, and that's exactly what you want. I had a client named Rachel whose narcissistic mother had controlled her entire life through guilt, manipulation, and constant criticism. For 35 years, Rachel had been dancing to her mother's tune, desperately trying to earn approval that was never going to come. But after Rachel learned to set boundaries and stop seeking her mother's validation, something amazing happened. At first, her mother escalated dramatically. She called Rachel multiple times a day, crying and raging about how cruel and selfish Rachel had become. She enlisted other family members to pressure Rachel into being reasonable. She even showed up at Rachel's workplace to cause a scene. But Rachel held firm. She didn't engage with the drama, didn't defend herself against the accusations, and didn't try to convince anyone that she was right. After about 6 months of getting no emotional reaction from Rachel, her mother's behavior completely changed. The constant phone calls stopped. The guilt trips became half-hearted and infrequent. The mother actually started being more pleasant during their limited interactions because she'd learned that drama and manipulation weren't going to work anymore. But the real transformation was in Rachel herself. For the first time in her adult life, she wasn't constantly anxious about her mother's opinion. She wasn't walking on eggshells trying to prevent the next explosion. She wasn't questioning her own decisions based on what her mother might think. Rachel had reclaimed her mental and emotional energy, and she used it to build a life that actually reflected her values and desires. This kind of personal growth is what happens when you stop letting other people define your reality. You discover who you actually are when you're not constantly trying to manage someone else's emotions. You start making decisions based on what's right for you, not what will prevent the next narcissistic rage. You begin to trust your own perceptions, your own judgment, your own worth. I've seen this transformation countless times. People who've been under narcissistic control for years suddenly start thriving in ways they never thought possible. Their health improves because they're not living under constant stress. Their relationships get better because they're not bringing all that toxic energy into their interactions with healthy people. Their careers take off because they're not second-guessing every decision or seeking approval for every move they make. But you have to stay vigilant because narcissists aren't the only manipulative people out there. And once you've been targeted by one, you can sometimes attract others. It's like you have a neon sign that says, "I'm easy to manipulate," until you learn to turn it off. The good news is that once you master these boundary setting skills with one narcissist, you'll recognize the patterns much faster when you encounter them again. Watch for the love bombing phase with new people. When someone seems too good to be true, when they're showering you with attention and praise right from the start, when they're trying to fast-track intimacy or commitment. Trust your gut when something feels off, even if you can't put your finger on exactly what it is. Notice when people try to isolate you from your support system, when they discourage your friendships or try to convince you that your family doesn't understand you. Pay attention to how they react when you set even small boundaries. Do they respect them, or do they push back and try to negotiate? Most importantly, remember that healthy people don't need to control your reality. They don't need you to see things exactly the way they see them. They don't punish you for having your own opinions, your own feelings, your own perspective on events. When you encounter people who respect your autonomy, it's like breathing fresh air after being in a smoke-filled room. Let me share some real testimonials from people who've used these techniques and completely transformed their lives. Sarah, the woman I mentioned at the beginning who was dealing with her husband's smear campaign, eventually divorced him. But because she'd learned to stop engaging with his manipulation, the divorce was actually smoother than anyone expected. She didn't get drawn into battles over every detail, didn't try to prove to the court that he was the problem, and didn't waste emotional energy on his attempts to punish her. She focused on protecting herself and her children, and she came out stronger. Tom had been dealing with a narcissistic boss for 3 years. The constant criticism and public humiliation had nearly broken him. But after learning to set boundaries and stop seeking his boss's approval, Tom's entire work experience changed. His confidence returned, his performance improved, and eventually he was promoted to a different department. His former boss tried to sabotage the promotion, but Tom's new supervisor had already seen his excellent work and wasn't swayed by the criticism. Jennifer, whose narcissistic mother I mentioned earlier, used these techniques to completely reshape their relationship. Her mother still has narcissistic tendencies, but she's learned that those tactics don't work on Jennifer anymore. Their interactions are now cordial but limited, and Jennifer no longer feels guilty about protecting her mental health. These aren't isolated success stories. This is what happens when you stop playing by a narcissist's rules and start living by your own values. You're not just surviving their manipulation anymore. You're thriving despite it. You're not just surviving, you're showing up in your life with real power. Hit subscribe, share this with someone who needs to hear it, and remember, their opinion is not your reality. Let that be your freedom forever.